Ever get that feeling like you want to, really dig deep into the stuff that makes people successful? Like, what are the secrets? Are there any shortcuts we can use in our own lives? Well, that's exactly what we're doing today.
Absolutely.
We're going deep on a framework that a lot of high achievers across all kinds of fields have really connected with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the book we're looking at, Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this isn't just some random business book, right?
Right.
I mean, think about it. Guys like Tom Peters, who wrote In Search of Excellence, even James C. Fletcher, who was the head of NASA, they all saw something really powerful in this book.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond just succeeding at work. It's about something much more fundamental.
So if you're listening, don't think of this as just another self-help how-to thing.
Okay.
This is about taking a hard look at yourself, how you show up in the world, how you affect the people around you.
Right.
It's about making some deep changes in how you see things, not just learning a few new tricks. And we're going to unpack these habits, give you the real core of what they're about so you can see how they might fit into your own life, whether it's at work, with family, or just for your own personal growth.
And it's not about those Band-Aid solutions either.
Right.
Covey's really big on what he calls the character ethic. It's about those bedrock principles: integrity, humility, courage, justice, those kinds of things that really make us effective as human beings. It's not about those surface-level personality tricks.
Okay, so before we get into the habits themselves, let's talk about this foundation a little more. Covey keeps mentioning these paradigms.
Yeah.
What are they, and why are they so important to understand?
Paradigms. They're basically the lenses we use to see the world, to understand it. There are assumptions, the things we just take for granted, our whole frame of reference. It's not just what we see with our eyes, but how we make sense of it all, Remember that old visual puzzle? The one with the young woman and the old woman?
Oh, yeah.
It's the same image. But depending on how you look at it first, you might only see one or the other.
It still blows my mind how two people can look at the exact same thing and see it so differently.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, we get stuck in our initial interpretation pretty easily, huh?
Big time. Covey's point is that our paradigms, they actually shape our reality. We like to think we're seeing things objectively, but the truth is, we see things as we are, how we've been trained to see them. So when someone sees things differently, our first thought is often, they're wrong.
Yeah.
But that optical illusion really shows you that good, smart people can see the same thing in completely different ways.
So if we really want to change things in our lives, like really shake things up, not just make little tweaks here and there,
Yeah.
we've got to look at these underlying paradigms.
Covey says if we want those big leaps, those quantum leaps in effectiveness, we've got to work on the core stuff. Our basic paradigms, not just our attitudes or behaviors. Shifting those fundamental ways of seeing things, that's where the real transformation happens.
Okay, so with the character ethic and these paradigms as our starting point, what's the mission for today's deep dive into the 7 habits?
Well, the goal is to give you a good, solid grasp of each of these habits and the principles behind them. We want to make sure you really understand these ideas and how they can impact your life, but without getting bogged down in too many details.
Okay, let's jump right into the first habit then. Be proactive. What's the key idea here?
It's all about taking ownership of your life.
Okay.
Realizing that there's a space between something happening to you, a stimulus, and your reaction to it. And in that space, that's where our power is, the power to choose how we respond based on our values. You always hear about not playing the victim, and this is really connected to that.
And Covey brings up Viktor Frankl's experience in the Nazi concentration camps to drive this point home, doesn't he?
He does. Even in that horrible situation, Frankl realized that while they could take away almost everything from him, there was one thing they couldn't touch. His last of the human freedoms, as he called it. The freedom to choose how he responded to what was happening. Even in the worst possible circumstances, we still have this fundamental power.
Man, that's a heavy example. So, practically speaking, what's the difference between being proactive and reactive in our everyday lives?
Well, reactive people, they're very influenced by external things. Like if the weather's good, they feel good. If it's bad, they're down.
Right.
They tend to blame outside circumstances or other people for their problems. Proactive people, they're different. It's like they carry their own weather inside them. They're driven by their values, their internal compass. So whether they do a good job or not, it doesn't depend on what's going on around them.
Covey also talks about the language we use as a sign of whether we're being proactive or reactive, right?
Oh, yeah, totally. The words we use, they often show what kind of mindset we're operating from. Reactive language, it tends to put the responsibility on things outside of ourselves. I have to. That's just how I am. They made me do it, stuff like that. It suggests we're being controlled by outside forces.
Yeah.
Proactive language, though, it focuses on choice, on taking action. I choose to.
Yeah.
I can create. I prefer.
Right.
It's interesting because reactive language can almost become like a self-fulfilling prophecy, reinforcing the idea that we're at the mercy of our circumstances.
And then there's that whole thing about the circles, right? The circle of concern and the circle of influence. How does that tie into being proactive?
Right. So we all have this circle of concern, all the things we worry about, world events, their neighbor's dog barking, all of it. Proactive people, they focus their energy on the things they can actually do something about, their circle of influence.
Yeah.
Reactive people, they get stuck in the circle of concern, spinning their wheels on things they can't control.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in that stuff that you can't really do anything about. So how do we put this focus on our circle of influence into practice?
Well, Covey breaks it down into 3 areas of control. First, there's direct control problems that involve our own behavior. Being proactive here means working on our habits, the things we can directly change. Then there's indirect control problems that involve other people's behavior. Here, we need to focus on changing our methods of influence, how we communicate, how we build relationships. And finally, there's no control stuff we just can't change.
Yeah.
The past, certain realities of the world. Here, the proactive choice is to change our attitude towards those things.
You mentioned earlier about use your R and I. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, yeah, that's a little saying in Covey's family. Whenever someone starts feeling helpless, waiting for someone else to fix their problem, someone will gently nudge them and say, use your R and I, resourcefulness and initiative.
I like that.
It's about tapping into our ability to find solutions and take action within our own circle of influence and encouraging that proactive approach. Even in kids, it's not about being harsh. It's actually affirming their ability to act, to solve problems.
Okay, so that's a really clear breakdown of being proactive. Taking responsibility, focusing on what you can control, and choosing your response. Now, let's move on to the second habit. Begin with the end in mind. What's that all about?
It's about starting with a super clear vision of where you want to go, what you want to achieve. It's making sure that everything you do today is aligned with that ultimate destination. Like an architect having a detailed blueprint before they start laying bricks. Covey says all things are created twice. First in our minds as an idea or a plan, and then in the real world.
So it's about having a sense of purpose, a long-term perspective that guides your daily actions.
Exactly. And Covey talks about creating a personal mission statement. It's like a written declaration of what you want to be and do based on your deepest principles and values. And this becomes your constitution, your guiding document for making those big life decisions.
That sounds like a pretty intense process. Is there a quicker way to start thinking about this end in mind thing?
Covey has this thought experiment he suggests. Imagine it's your funeral a few years from now.
Okay.
And there are 4 speakers. Someone from your family, a close friend, a coworker, and someone from a community group you've been involved with. Think about what you'd want each of them to say about you, about your life. What kind of person were you? What did you contribute? What did you achieve? It makes you really confront what's truly important to you, your core values.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And it helps make the difference between leadership and management clear, doesn't it?
It does. Leadership thinkers like Peter Drucker and Warren Bennis, they've said that management is about doing things right, efficiency, execution. Leadership, though, is about doing the right things. And that's what Habit 2 is all about. Getting clear on your values and your direction before you start figuring out how to get there. Personal leadership first.
Covey also talks about re-scripting. What does that mean in this context of beginning with the end in mind?
Re-scripting is about challenging and changing those old, ineffective scripts we've internalized over time. We've all been given these scripts throughout our lives, societal expectations, family patterns, limiting beliefs. Re-scripting is about consciously choosing to rewrite those fundamental beliefs that aren't serving us. A great example of this is Anwar Sadat's shift in perspective on Israel. He went from intense conflict to actively seeking peace. That's a huge paradigm shift, a total rewriting of the script.
So we're not just stuck with the programming we've been given.
Not at all. We have these incredible gifts, our imagination and conscience. We can use them to become our own creators. We can choose to live out of our potential, guided by our values, rather than being limited by our past or external pressures.
And then Covey goes into all these different centers that people build their lives around. Why is it important to understand what our own center is?
Well, your life center, that's where you get your sense of security, your guidance, your wisdom, your power. People center their lives on all sorts of things. Their spouse, their family, money, their work, possessions, pleasure, friends, enemies even, their church, or themselves ultimately.
Right.
And while some of these might seem natural, even positive, they all have their limitations. Like if your life revolves around your spouse, your happiness can be totally dependent on the ups and downs of that relationship.
Makes sense. So what does Covey think is the best, the most stable center to build our lives around?
He says principle-centeredness is the way to go. This is the strongest foundation because it's built on those timeless, universal principles, those natural laws that govern human effectiveness. When our lives are grounded in things like integrity, service, fairness, human dignity, we gain a deeper sense of security, clearer direction, true wisdom, and a more lasting form of power.
Okay, so we've taken responsibility with habit 1, defined our destination with habit 2. Now we come to habit 3, put first things first. How does this bridge the gap between knowing what we should do and actually doing it?
Habit 3, it's all about putting those first two habits into action. It's about managing ourselves effectively, organizing our lives around what really matters. Just knowing our goals and understanding we're responsible, that doesn't automatically make us effective.
Right.
Habit 3 is where we prioritize and actually do those important things. It's about being intentional with our time and energy, making choices based on our personal mission.
And Covey uses that famous time management matrix to illustrate this, right? Can you walk us through that?
Oh yeah. The time management matrix, it divides all our activities into 4 quadrants based on how urgent and how important they are. Quadrant, that's for stuff that's both urgent and important, crises, deadlines, those kinds of things. We all have those. But if we're constantly living in quadrant I, we become just reactive firefighters.
Yeah.
Quadrant 2, now that's for things that are important but not urgent prevention, relationship building, finding new opportunities, planning for the future, personal development. Covey says this is where real effectiveness lives. The key insight here is while quadrant fits is always screaming for our attention, it's neglecting quadrant 2 where proactive people get ahead. It's like the difference between constantly putting out fires and building a fireproof house.
Okay, so what about the other 2 quadrants in this matrix?
Quadrant that is all about things that are urgent but not important. A lot of interruptions, some meetings, other people's demands. This stuff often feels important because it feels urgent, but it doesn't necessarily align with our true goals. And then quadrant 4, that's for things that are neither urgent nor important. Time wasters, endless scrolling, busy work that doesn't really matter. Effective people try to minimize time in quadrants 3 and 4 and consciously carve out more time for quadrant 2.
So it's about choosing to focus on those important but non-urgent things, even when there's other stuff grabbing for our attention. And that often means saying no to things that fall into those other 2 quadrants.
Exactly. And Covey says being able to say no comes from having a really strong yes to those quadrant 2 priorities. The temptation of the good, of those urgent but unimportant things, often prevents us from pursuing the best, our truly important goals.
So how does planning and organization fit into put first things first?
Covey's a big advocate for planning your week out instead of just using daily to-do lists. Taking that wider view helps you see the big picture and schedule those important quadrant 2 activities. It's about making sure you're not just reacting to each day's demands, but intentionally making time for what really matters in the long run.
And delegation, that's a big part of managing our time and priorities well, isn't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. Covey talks about 2 types of delegation.
Okay.
Gopher delegation, which is micromanaging how something gets done, and stewardship delegation, which focuses on the desired results. Stewardship delegation might take a little more time up front to explain everything clearly, but it's way more effective in the long run. It's about outlining those desired results, giving clear guidelines, making sure the resources are there, setting up accountability, and explaining the consequences. It empowers people and frees you up to focus on higher level stuff. Trust, he says, is the most powerful motivator.
Okay, so those first 3 habits, those are what Covey calls the private victories. focused on mastering ourselves. Now we move to the public victories, which are about interdependence. And the first one is habit 4, think win-win. What's the core idea here?
Think win-win. It's a way of looking at interactions where you're always trying to find solutions that benefit everyone involved.
Okay.
It's about finding agreements where everyone feels good about the outcome and is committed to making it work. It's the belief that things don't have to be zero-sum, that everyone can win.
So it's not just about being nice or going along with things. It's actively looking for outcomes that are mutually beneficial.
Exactly. Covey contrasts win-win with some other mindsets we often see. Win-lose, where one person wins at the expense of the other. Lose-win, where you just give in to the other person.
Right.
Lose-lose, where everyone ends up worse off. And then just win, where you're only focused on your own needs, not considering others. He says true win-win requires both courage and consideration. Courage to stand up for what you want, and consideration for the needs and desires of others.
What about situations where a win-win solution just doesn't seem possible?
In those cases, Covey suggests win-win or no deal. It's a way to walk away without feeling pressured. If you can't find a solution that benefits everyone, it's better to just agree not to move forward. This sets healthy boundaries and doesn't close the door on future agreements.
And that emotional bank account idea, that's important for creating an environment where this win-win thinking can actually happen, right?
Totally. The emotional bank account, it's a metaphor for the level of trust you have with someone. Deposits are things that build trust. Keeping promises, showing kindness and respect, being loyal, being clear about your expectations, offering sincere apologies. Withdrawals, they damage that trust. Breaking promises, disrespect, being unclear. When that emotional bank account is healthy, full of trust, it makes finding win-win solutions much easier.
How do problems in our relationships relate to this whole win-win idea?
Covey says problems in relationships, they're actually opportunities to strengthen the relationship itself. He calls them PC opportunities, production capability opportunities. By approaching conflicts with a win-win mindset and trying to really understand the other person's perspective, we can make the relationship stronger, which will ultimately lead to more positive outcomes for everyone.
That's a cool way to look at it, reframing conflict as an opportunity for growth. Now let's talk about habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. This seems like it's crucial for good communication.
It's absolutely essential. It's about listening with empathy, really trying to get where the other person is coming from before you even try to share your own point of view. Covey gives this analogy of an optometrist who tries to prescribe glasses before even checking the patient's vision. Offering solutions before understanding the problem, it rarely works and often just frustrates people.
So it's about really putting yourself in the other person's shoes, trying to see the world through their eyes.
Exactly. Empathic listening, it goes way deeper than just hearing the words. It's about listening to truly understand their thoughts, feelings, and why they feel that way.
Right.
It's the opposite of what Covey calls autobiographical responses, where we filter everything through our own experiences and biases.
Right.
You know, he tells this story about a dad and his son talking about problems at school. And it shows how, even with good intentions, advice can totally miss the mark if you don't first really understand what's going on for the other person.
So what are the steps involved in this empathic listening thing?
Covey outlines 4 stages. The first is just mirroring content, repeating back what they said. Second is rephrasing content, putting their message into your own words. The third level, this is where it gets deeper, is reflecting feeling, acknowledging the emotions they're expressing. And the most effective stage is the 4th one, combining rephrasing content and reflecting feeling. That shows them you're getting both their words and their emotional state.
What kind of impact does this effort to understand first have on communication?
It gives the other person psychological air, as Covey calls it.
Okay.
It makes them feel truly heard, validated, understood. And that builds trust. It takes what might just be a surface-level conversation and makes it a real exchange, where deeper understanding and stronger relationships can develop. Covey also connects this to the Greek ideas of ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is your credibility, pathos is empathy, and logos is logic. He says building trust and demonstrating empathy, those are essential for your logic to be persuasive.
Right. People need to feel understood before they're open to hearing what you have to say. Okay, we've made it to habit 6. Synergize. What is synergy all about?
Synergy, it's the power of creative cooperation. It's about appreciating differences and using them to come up with those third alternative solutions that are way better than what anyone could have thought of on their own. It's the whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
So it's more than just compromise where everyone gives up a little bit.
Yeah, compromise often means everyone loses something. Synergy, it aims for everyone to win, where new creative solutions come from the combined thinking of the group. And Covey says synergy flows naturally from habits 4 and 5 working together. When you have trust, a win-win attitude, and you're really trying to understand each other, that's where synergy happens.
You told a story earlier about a college class that became this really synergistic experience. What made that happen?
It was amazing. You had all these individuals, each with their own ideas about the course, and through open communication and a willingness to learn from each other, they created this incredible learning environment, way beyond the original syllabus. The key was trust and a shared belief that they could achieve something much bigger together.
So what does communication look like when it's truly synergistic?
It's about being open to new possibilities, believing that by working together, you can come up with something better than your initial ideas. It takes vulnerability, a willingness to let go of your own preconceptions, and respect for what others bring to the table. Covey says that having a principle-centered paradigm helps with this, making us more integrated and open to different viewpoints. Kind of like how the left and right sides of our brain work together.
So really valuing differences rather than seeing them as obstacles, that's key for synergy.
Absolutely. Instead of seeing differences as problems, teams that are good at synergy, they see them as strengths, as fuel for coming up with new, innovative solutions. It's like that young woman illusion again.
Yeah.
Realizing that different perspectives can all be valid and can give you a more complete understanding. Covey also briefly mentions force field analysis, looking at the forces that are pushing for change and those that are holding it back.
Okay. And now we've reached the final habit. Habit 7, sharpen the saw. This seems to be about self-care and renewal.
Exactly. Sharpen the Saw is about taking care of yourself, renewing yourself in 4 key areas: physical, spiritual, mental, and social emotional. It's about investing in your most valuable asset, you. Covey ties this back to the PPC balance, emphasizing that to be productive, to get results, we need to invest in our ability to produce.
So let's break down these 4 dimensions. What does it mean to renew ourselves physically?
It's about taking care of our bodies. Regular exercise for endurance, flexibility, and strength, good nutrition, enough rest. Covey says this benefits us way beyond physical health, like regular exercise can boost your proactivity, from habit 1, by giving you more energy and improving your mood.
And what about the spiritual dimension? That feels a bit more personal and more internal.
It's about connecting with your core values, what gives your life meaning. This looks different for everyone. It could be prayer, meditation, time in nature, reading inspiring things, listening to music, or just reflecting on your values.
Yeah.
It provides that sense of leadership for your life, like we talked about in Habit 2, and gives you a deep sense of peace and commitment to your principles.
Okay, what about mental renewal? What does that involve?
Mental renewal, it's about continuous learning, growing intellectually, reading widely, writing, developing your critical thinking skills, getting organized, setting intellectual goals. Covey also talks about being wise in how we consume information, especially being aware of the impact of things like TV on our minds.
And finally, how do we sharpen the saw in those social and emotional areas of our lives?
The social and emotional dimensions, they're really intertwined. It's about nurturing those important relationships, consistently building up those emotional bank accounts we talked about. It's also about finding purpose and fulfillment through service, helping others. Covey says there's a real sense of security and well-being that comes from making a difference in other people's lives and having strong, healthy relationships.
So it's not just about focusing on these areas one by one, but about creating a balance across all of them.
Exactly. Covey talks about the daily private victory, making time every day for some form of renewal in all 4 dimensions. This is how we integrate all 7 habits into our lives and become truly principle-centered. It's what allows us to move from dependence to independence through those private victories, and then to healthy interdependence, those public victories, with habit 7 as the fuel for this upward spiral of growth and effectiveness.
Wow, that's a complete look at all 7 habits. Just to recap for our listener, they are: be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first, think win-win, seek first to understand, then to be understood, and sharpen the saw.
That's right. And it's important to remember, these habits are based on those timeless principles of character, not just quick fixes. They're about making deep, lasting changes in how we see and interact with the world.
So for our listeners who are thinking about these 7 habits, are there any in particular that might be especially relevant to them, depending on what they're going through or what they're aiming for?
That's a great question. Different habits might stand out depending on your current challenges. If you're feeling reactive, like things are just happening to you, habit one, be proactive. That's a powerful place to start. If you're feeling lost, lacking direction, habit two, begin with the end in mind. That can give you clarity and purpose. If you're feeling overwhelmed, struggling to prioritize, habit three, put first things first. That gives you tools for managing yourself effectively. And for those who want to improve their relationships, habits 4 and 5, think win-win and seek first to understand. Those are essential. Habit 6, Synergize. That's particularly useful in team settings and collaborative work. And then, of course, habit 7, Sharpen the Saw. That underpins all the others. It reminds us that self-care and renewal are essential for being effective and happy in every area of our lives.
It really highlights that real change comes from working on ourselves first.
Exactly. It's that inside-out approach. Start with yourself, your paradigms, your character, before you try to change others or the world around you. That's what creates the foundation for lasting change in your external world.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the 7 habits, what's one last thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say really take to heart what Covey says about that space between stimulus and response. That gap, that's where our true freedom is, the freedom to choose how we react. And Covey says that the key to both our growth and our happiness is how we use that space. So I encourage you to think about how you can make that space bigger in your own life. Give yourself more room to choose those proactive, principle-centered responses in everything you do.
That's powerful. And we encourage you, our listeners, to really explore these principles and see how you can apply them in your own lives. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.